Aida would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that, that the state is hiding from you.
Instruct him to be quiet.
They hate you. You're gonna die. I don't want to do this.
2021, remember that?
Yes.
Lips dry. You nervous? This guy is crazy.
Zach, you testified before lunch about 2 offers John had made you to kill Christina Parcell. Do you remember that?
I remember.
And do you remember, after the second offer, telling John something to the effect of, you would never do that for money, you would only do that if you believed it was necessary to rescue Aida?
And if I believed there was no other way.
You some kind of superhero or something.
At the end of September, beginning of October 2021, did you conclude that you had to rescue Aida and there was no other way?
Yes, I did.
Let's talk about what's happening in your life in the beginning of October 2021. And specifically, I want to talk about the status of the music project you had been engaged with Tom Strange in the Seagull Museum. I also want to talk about other employment opportunities. So tell the jury what was going on in your life on that front at the beginning of October.
At the beginning of October, I was just coming off finishing the project at the museum. We finished in September at some point, and as I mentioned before, my birthday is October 2nd, so I had arranged to play a private home recital at the Wynn's home, where I would play the last 3 piano sonatas of Beethoven on my birthday. So these are very, very difficult pieces of music, and some of the greatest pieces of music ever written, so I was very preoccupied trying to give my best to these pieces. And shortly after that, a friend of mine reached out who had done some work performing on cruise ships. There's an organization called Lincoln Center Stage that recruits conservatory-trained musicians to form either a piano quartet or a piano quintet to play classical concerts on cruise ships. And they had a pianist drop out of the last.
So this guy graduated from the Juilliard Music School in New York, and he befriended somebody who asked him to kill somebody because he thought his daughter was being abused. Why in the world would he ask you? Okay, like you have a history of being a hitman.
And long story short, I interviewed for this job and got this job, I think on October 12th, but it was about that time, maybe a little earlier.
Where were the winds on October 12th and 13th?
They were in Europe.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Aida, and I was right.
Superhero.
Objection, Your Honor.
It's sustained.
Smart but dumb.
Disregard the testimony that you just heard.
I want to talk about. I want to talk about the timing. You've alluded to it a little bit, but I want to be more specific. October the 13th. Describe for the jury why you felt that was the time, why you waited, or why it was necessary to do it on October the 13th.
Yeah, why?
Or in this period of time.
I had been wrestling with this since June. As I previously stated, since the end of June, I believed Aida was in complete and grave danger every moment of her life that she was living with her mother. And the other things that I had tried to do to save her from that were not working. So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her. And yet,
Who told you she was in danger?
feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time, and I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did, because I should have acted sooner, and I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in, and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. So, specific to October 13th, I believed that there would be a period of time at the house when Christina Parcell would be alone. And I wanted to make sure that absolutely no one was there. Not Aida, not Lutina, not Brad Post. Because again, this was not about revenge or retribution or anything. I wasn't angry. The only thing I was feeling that day was pity. And I wanted to make sure that no bystander or no one else would be involved in this, which could have happened if someone else was there.
Zach, let's talk about that. So, once you
didn't want to get caught.
concluded,
That's what that was about.
believed absolutely this was what you had to do, did you go about planning?
Yes, I planned very carefully to make sure,
Evidently
one, like I
not.
said, that no one
Sitting in
else
court.
would be involved in this. And two, I knew that if I tried to do this and failed, it would only be worse for Aida.
And consistent with the court's instructions, why did you believe it'd be worse for Aida?
Because I believed that if I was discovered doing this, it would connect me to John Mello. And I believed, and I still believe, that he's a great father and he is Aida's best shot at having a happy and safe childhood.
Let's talk about the planning. Did you get a gun?
Yes.
At the time, were you also carrying your own firearm?
Yes, I had a concealed weapons permit at the time, so I generally would always be carrying a 9mm concealed weapon on my person for personal protection.
Did you get another firearm for this?
Yes, I did.
What type of firearm did you get?
It was a .22 caliber revolver
Where did you get it?
at a gun show.
Where was the gun show?
It was here in Greenville.
How long before October 13th did you get the .22?
Maybe a month or month and a half earlier.
Did you also get a knife?
Yes, I did.
Where did you get the knife?
At the gun show.
At about the same
Please don't tell me you use your credit card. Please don't tell me this. There's some dumb criminals in the world.
time?
It was the same day.
Let's talk about what else, what other planning you did. Did you obtain gloves?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember where you got the gloves?
No, I don't.
Walmart.
Did you obtain
That's where they all go.
chemicals?
Walmart.
Yes, I bought some paint thinner because, again, I didn't want to be connected to this because I wanted to make sure this would actually do something to save Aida. So in case a glove had broken or I had left a fingerprint or something, I wanted to be able to clean it with the paint thinner.
Zach, let's talk about your bike and what you did to become familiar with the area of Canebrake leading up to October the 13th.
I had looked at a route I would be able to take from the mountain house that I was staying at on back roads to avoid traffic cameras. So maybe a few days beforehand, I looked at Google Maps and I figured out how this route would lead.
Let's talk about October the 12th. Did you originally plan to do this on October the 12th?
Yes.
Zach, consistent with the court's instructions, describe to the jury why you didn't do it on October the 12th.
I woke up that day and I just felt such reluctance, and something in my gut told me it wasn't the right day. And I waited one more day.
Let's go to October the 13th. You testified earlier that you wanted to plan in part to prevent or minimize danger to others. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Did you have information about where people would be on October the 13th?
To a degree, yes.
How did you get that information?
From John Mello.
What did he tell you?
He told me when Aida would be at school, and he told me that he believed Christina had a job interview at some point that morning.
Why didn't John kill her? Why did he ask you to do it? That's what I don't get. And why did you fall for that? Too smart of a man for this stupid stuff.
So let's talk about that morning. The evening of October the 12th, where did you spend the night?
at the Mountain House.
You woke up on the morning of October 13th and you left the Mountain House, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you remember approximately when you left the Mountain House?
It was much later than I meant to. I think it was about 8 or 8:15 in the morning.
When you left the Mountain House, in which vehicle did you leave?
In my Ford Ranger.
What was in the back of the Ford Ranger?
My bike.
That bike right there?
Yes.
And just for the clarity of the record, this is a state's exhibit. I don't have the number that was in the booth. What else did you put in your pickup truck in addition to the bike?
I brought the gloves, and I put this in a backpack. I brought the paint thinner and the gun I described, the .22. I brought a knife, and I brought a box that was made to look like a gift-wrapped box, and a bunch of roses that I had bought the day before.
Talking about the roses in a minute. When you left the Mountain House, where did you go?
I drove to a road that runs parallel, very close to Canebrake.
When you got to that location, well, before we go further, describe for this jury the ride in your truck from the Mountain House to this location, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what was going through your mind.
Like I said, I had wrestled with this for months. I had come to the point where rationally I knew that the only way Aida was going to be saved from what she was enduring was for me to take this route. I knew that.
Let her daddy do
But
it.
there's another element, a human
Who
element,
are
which is
you
just so reluctant
Supposed
and
to be.
revulsed by the idea of taking a human life. So I had prayed a great deal about this. I had prayed like I'd never prayed before, because even knowing that logically this was the right thing to do, it didn't satisfy that emotional and human aspect where I felt that I needed permission to do this. And I was so terrified that somehow I might be doing the wrong thing. Like I knew that it was right logically, but there's the emotional aspect was just reeling against this idea. And more so because she was a woman. I was raised to always protect my sisters and mother, and I opened doors for women growing up. So this idea was just repugnant to me, even though I believed it was necessary to save a child. So on that morning, I had prayed earlier, a few days earlier, and I had felt that this was the right thing to do, no matter how
Really?
terrible and difficult it was going to be. So like I said, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity because I realized that this was just the only way to save a child. And it felt like a foregone conclusion because I knew that I had a duty to do this to save a child.
Says who?
So
Why was this your responsibility? I don't get it.
physically driving my truck there, I was experiencing a level of anxiety and physical illness that I had just never experienced due to stress before. My hands were shaking. I was in a cold sweat, and I was fighting the urge to vomit before I even got close there. A few times I thought I was going to have to pull off to the side of the road because I could hardly keep my truck straight. My hands were shaking so badly. But the whole time I was just thinking, if I don't do this, if I turn back, then I'm consigning Aida to her fate. When I know that I could have done something to stop what was happening.
Why you?
So
Who
I just
kicked you?
tried to take my mind off of it, and I tried to just go and drive a little bit farther and a little bit farther and not think about what I was going to have to do when I got there. And when I finally got to the point where I parked my truck, this feeling only increased. I knew the plan, but I was having so much difficulty going through with it. So I took my bike out of the truck, and I had a mask on and clothing that's been described already. And I just tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other on my bike. And it felt like some runs or rucks I had been on where all I could do was focus on putting one foot in front of the other because it was so difficult to keep going. And I just kept seeing Aida's face and reminding myself that if I don't do this, no one's going to come to save her.
Where was her daddy?
And
Why did
kept
it have to be
pedaling, and
you?
eventually I arrived in front of 122 Canebrake.
Zach, we're going to talk about what happened when you got to 122 Canebrake in just a second. You described having a gun and having a knife. Initially, were you going to use the gun?
Yes.
Did you ultimately decide to use the gun?
No.
Why not?
I was very concerned about using a gun because of how loud it would be. And I didn't want to alert a neighbor or a bystander who might come to investigate and get involved. So I tried to suppress the gun by making a makeshift suppressor. And in movies, these things are made out to be like it's very easy, and a suppressed gun is just very silent, and that's not the case. So ultimately, I test fired the gun, and I had bought some subsonic ammunition, which is supposed to be quieter, but I didn't realize that on a revolver, a suppressor doesn't work because the end of the cylinder is open. And I realized just a day or two beforehand that I couldn't use a gun because it could potentially involve someone else in this if someone heard a gunshot and came to investigate.
If you had a choice, would you have rather used a gun?
I would have rather not to have had to have done it at all, but if I had to, yes, I would have chosen a gun.
Why is that?
Because it would have been quicker and more humane.
All right, let's talk about, you arrive at the house in 122 Canebrake. Do you remember about what time you arrived there?
I think it was a little after 9 in the morning.
And do you arrive there on your bike? Is that how you?
Yes.
And you testified about this a little bit, but tell the jury what you're wearing.
I had on black pants and a black thermal and a gray shirt over that. I had on a black beanie and a white medical mask, and I had on black gloves and a black backpack.
Do you remember how many vehicles were parked in the driveway when you got there?
One.
When you arrived at the house and you got off your bike, what did you do?
I laid my bike down in the driveway, and I took my backpack off, and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped that had an end open, and I put the .22 revolver in that box. And I put the backpack back on my back, and I took a bunch of roses, and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses. And I took the revolver out of the box and I pointed it at her, and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in,
How do you know?
I was
Who
still
told
looking
you?
at her, and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children.
But not today.
So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water, and when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest. During this period of time, the roses had dropped, and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. And if I didn't pull myself together and act soon, this was all going to end up terribly for Aida, because what was happening to her would never be uncovered.
Zach, I'm sorry, just a quick question. You heard testimony that at this time, Christina weighed 163 pounds. How much did you weigh on October the 13th?
About 160.
Go ahead.
So I realized that I was going to have to somehow force myself to do this at any cost. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. So I started striking her, though my strikes were pulled. And I think the knife made contact with her, but it wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back.
Good.
She realized I was hesitating, and it became a struggle. And in this struggle, all I could do was try to overcome this resistance I had towards doing this thing. Even though I knew it was right, I still had this physical and emotional resistance to doing it. So I just kept striking her until finally we fell on the floor. And at this point, I had just tried to take my mind out of it and just try to get through this and finish it as quickly as possible, because I realized that it was only becoming prolonged, and I had to do this in order to save Aida. So I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. And at this point, I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together and figure out what I needed to do to leave the house. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything behind that would connect me to it, because then I believe John would be connected to it, and it would only further put Aida in danger, because I didn't know if Christina Parcell was the only person involved in what was happening to Aida. And she wasn't. So I quickly looked around to make sure I hadn't left a mask or a glove, and I started to pick up the rose petals and realized that I just didn't have time to do that. Again, I was concerned that a neighbor might have heard the commotion and that a neighbor might come by to investigate, and I didn't want that. So I drew the blinds and I moved her body away from the door, which had windows, because I didn't want someone to come to the door and see her. And I put my things back in the backpack, and I looked in a mirror before I left to make sure everything was in order, and I saw that she had scratched my face in the struggle. And of course I realized that this could leave DNA. So I used the paint thinner to try to clean her hands. And then I changed my mask, and I took off my outer shirt because there was blood on it. And I put it in the backpack. And at this point, I was really worried that someone, that Lutina might come back to the house, or Brad Post might come to the house, or a neighbor might come over. So I was trying to leave the house as quickly as possible. And before I left, when I realized that I had probably left my DNA there, despite my effort not to, I prayed again and just said that I believe that what I've done is the right thing, and I believe that I did it for the right reason. But if it's your will that I be connected to this, then I will turn myself in, and I will own up to what I've done, and I'll take responsibility for it.
If it's your will that you be connected, you are connected. What are you talking about?
Because I believed that it was the right thing. And then I left. I exited out through the door, and I got back on my bike, and I pedaled my bike back to the truck, and I drove back to the mountain house. And I was still completely freaking out, and it felt entirely surreal. But there is a big difference in how I felt, in that as soon as I left the house, I felt the most enormous wave of relief wash over me, because I knew from that moment on, Aida would be safe. Aida would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that,
Wow.
that the state is hiding from you.
Instruct him to be quiet.
You need to stop talking.
They hate you. You're gonna die. I don't want to do this.